Looks like we are at 4:45 and we are here at this time for a workshop with Hank Harris and his team on our superintendent search. So if nobody else has anything at this point, I'm just going to turn it right over to you, Hank, and it's all yours.
Thanks, Brandino. Hello, board and guests. It's been a little time since we've gotten together, and we are now in the 2021-22 school year, I believe, right? So we have important work to do over the course of this year, and this meeting kind of kicks it off. When we last met, we were planning for an online survey that went out to the community, as well as focus groups that were conducted largely by my colleague, Barbara Young. I participated in those as well, particularly with our school board members. And so our work tonight is very much about the results of that work. My colleague, John Steach, is here with me today. John is from CEE, the Center for Education Effectiveness, and his work was specifically around the analysis of the online survey. So in terms of our next hour or hour and 5 minutes, we're going to actually start with John, who's going to walk you through some materials that you did receive before the weekend. You may or may not have had a chance to look through them. But again, John's going to walk you through what we learned through conducting the online survey. I'll then return to talk about, okay, so what do we do with that? And so my work with the board tonight is about a document that we call the Superintendent Search Ideal Profile. And I'll tell you more about that later. But that is the work that you're going to be spending time on today as a board to make sure that reflects what it is that you are looking for in the new superintendent. So again, big picture synopsis. We're going to start with John. John, I know I saw you there. I don't know, is your video on, John?
I can unmute, but I can't share video or share screen. And I don't know if you really need to see me, but at least you need to be able to see my screen.
You bet, John, whatever works for you. We'd love to see you in video, but we'll take you as you are. And I know you're going to walk through these, the materials related to the survey. So I'm going to turn it over to you, John. Take it away.
So thanks for having me. As Hank mentioned, this is our first endeavor of working together. Just to give you an idea of my background, I was actually a school board member over in Richland, Washington for 8 years, and then eventually decided to become a school administrator. So I switched careers midstream, eventually became deputy superintendent in Richland. I was the superintendent in Canby and just barely missed Hank Harris in Canby, Oregon. And that's how we sort of got connected. We met there when he came back to visit his old district. And then went on to become deputy superintendent in Evergreen down in Vancouver, Washington. And 2 years ago, joined Center for Educational Effectiveness. So what I want to do today is I reached out to Hank about partnering with him and being able to provide some quality surveys relative to superintendent search. And you've hopefully been able to take a quick look at the document. I want to take a few minutes and make sure that you understand what's actually in the document and how to read it and interpret it. And then I'm going to walk you through the executive summary that I provided of the data as well. So the survey that was administered is based on PESL, or the Professional Standards for Educational Leaders. These are national standards. And they identified 10 specific criteria that high quality leaders would exhibit or perform within their duties of school districts. And that's what we really wanted to dig into. And we've taken a subset of those that we think are the most applicable to being able to identify the needs for the school district around a new superintendent and the work that needs to be done, and hopefully those criteria that you would be selecting your superintendent by to meet the needs of the district. So within the report, and I'll scroll down just a couple pages. First, you have some demographics that show you who took the survey. And when I look at this, you can see that parents made up about half of the people that took the survey, followed by certificated staff, classified or confidential non-represented staff. Then community members, only 27, administrators and supervisory staff, 7, and 4 students took the survey. We also see that you've got the ethnicity that we asked that question because we want to make sure you get a representative sample of your community. And when I flip over to the analysis, I'll show you how I use that to see if you've potentially got some gaps in the data that you were able to collect, and maybe there's a segment of their community that their voice may not be fully heard in the survey. And then we also look at the gender, male versus female, and others who respond to the survey. So this gives you an idea of who all you're getting perceptions from relative to how the district's going and those priorities that you should be placing on the skill set the new superintendent will bring to the district. Following that page, you have several pages that look pretty similar. This is the overall page, which shows you the 10 PESEL standards just listed. Can't remember, I think they're actually just listed in the way they appear within PESEL. Then these are the potential responses, and we use a 5-point Likert scale. So everything from very strong in this area, neither strong nor weak, all the way down to needs to greatly improve in this area relative to the superintendent or the district performance in these areas. So we then weight these. So you can see the percentage of respondents for each of the overall standards as averaged. And then we weight those by applying a point value where you want to have the highest value possible. So 5 points for a very strong, 4 points for strong, 3, 2, 1. So here you can see from the total point values that 2.74 for community of care and support for district, that is seen currently as the strongest area of the district. If you go down to the 1.94, that school improvement, those are the items that combined show the probably weakest area of the district, as well as operations and management at 2.02. So that's how you'd read this chart. Your strongest areas are going to have high numbers, are going to have more blue. Your weakest areas are going to have more red and orange, and they're going to have lower numbers. These are made up of averages of 4 questions each that we have around each of these standards. And an example of looking at those 4 questions is you can go down to the first page. So here for mission, vision, and core values, these are the 4 specific questions that come right out of the PESEL standards that we ask about mission, vision, and core values. So then we look at the Likert responses, we average for this PESEL number 1, and that's what we report. In addition to seeing the individual questions, down here you can see the individual questions broken down by response group. So if you come down to uses data to develop, implement, and monitor the vision for academic success and well-being of each student, your students rated that as a 3.5. which is pretty darn high. Your parents were down here at about 2.3 or 2.2. And you can see administration supervisory around 2.6. The lowest group appears to be your classified confidential staff. So with each of the items in the overall survey, you can then look down and see how the different response groups felt around each one. So if you really want to drill into the data, you can spend a bunch of time in this report. I just wanted to make sure you were able to read it and understand what the data means and how it's laid out. The other thing that we added specifically for this one, and it's at the bottom of page 2, is we gave people the chance to rank their highest priority areas that they feel the board should address in hiring a superintendent. What is that 1 or 2 or 3 big ticket items out of this list of 10 that they would say this is what the board needs to focus on? So we asked for them to rank their top 3. You can see in this first column here, ranked first, 32 people said mission, vision, and core values. 53 said ethics and professional norms. So those were ranked first, the most of anything. Ranked second, community of care and support for students happened to be ranked second 27 times, but it was only the 4th most ranked item first. So this provides a heat map, which gives you some information. What I tried to do, and I'm going to jump to the executive summary next, is I wanted to give you a little more of an analysis. So what I did was I applied a point value for each time the item was ranked first, second, or third, added those point values up to get a total ranking top to bottom of how I would see the totality of the survey respondents saying, this is the number one item you need to address with your new superintendent. Here's number two, and here's number three. So that's what I provided in that executive summary. So I'm going to jump over now to that executive summary. And I gave you a little bit of narrative of 306 responses, 46% staff, 44% parents, 9% community, and 1% students. Looking at that ethnicity, this is cut and pasted right out of that PDF report. What I compared that to is what OSPI has on your school report card as your racial breakdown of your student population currently within the school system. So you can see you currently have 75.2% of your students identify as white, whereas 86.4% of the survey responses identified themselves as white. If you go to the lower populations like the Asian, the Black, the American Indian, Alaska Natives, those are all pretty close to the same overall percentages. Where the white exceeds in the racial group that did not really take the survey is in your Hispanic, Latino, or two or more races. So you can see Hispanic, Latino, 13.4%. You only had 5.8% of the survey responses are Hispanic, Latino. Two or more races, you had 2.7% of the survey responses, and they make up 7.5%. So between those, you should have seen around 21% are Hispanic, Latino, or two or more races. Instead of 20%, you've got about 8.5%. So about less than even half of what the representation you would think. Looking at that ranking that I just talked about of taking those, we told people to rank their first, second, and third choices. You can see here, ethics and professional norms, 53 individuals ranked that first, 19 second, and 26 third. So if you get 3 points for a first, 2 points for a second, and 1 point for a third, you got 223 points. And as you can see, looking at that comparison to all other areas, I think you have a very loud statement from the people who took the survey that said ethics and professional norms needs to be a very high priority in the individual that you hire for your superintendent. That is going to be followed by a group of, I would look at really those next three, which is mission, vision, core values, community of care and support for students, and curriculum instruction and assessment. So those are the next tier areas that you ought to be looking at, maybe bringing a meaningful engagement. The other areas that are under 100 points total, those aren't perceived as the highest priorities that need to be addressed within the district most immediately. So then I went down and I wanted to offer up to you, looking at those PESTEL standards, what are the areas that are most positively viewed, and looking at a combination of those mean scores and where those rank. The positive areas of the district are that community of care and support for students. So while that was ranked the most positive, it still showed up as people saying we need to focus on this. Sort of, you know, it's seen as a strength of the district. People want that to continue, so they're going to want that new superintendent to support the work that's already been going on. Meaningful engagement of families and community had a score of 2.51, not as high. PESTEL priority ranking of 5. And then equity and cultural responsiveness was ranked number 6 on the priority. Again, not quite as high, with a score of 2.4. The areas viewed least positive, which is interesting to see that school improvement was seen as the lowest area. It was not ranked when people said, what do we need to really focus on? So that's kind of interesting that people say we're not strong in school improvement, but we don't really think the other areas are more important for you to focus on in hiring a superintendent than this is, even though it's not a strength of the district. And you've also got operations management, similar, professional community for teachers and staff. So you've got the items that are, you know, the least positively viewed by the community may not be the areas that they're really saying need to be focused on. I also wanted to take a look at what are the items with the greatest indication of need for improvement that people just went through, and on the individual items, maybe not on the the PESEL standard level, but of those 4 items that make up the standard, I provided you a ranked list of the items where people said, these are the areas that we really think need to be focused on. Number 1 is openly discusses problems to achieve mutually agreed upon solution. That fits right there with that ethical behavior. They want somebody who is transparent, honest, and open in their communications to the public. Right behind that, exemplifying professional norms of integrity, fairness, and transparency. Actively managing competing initiatives of change through support, encouragement, and open communications. You've got communication in there, and there's a realization in this standard that there's a lot of priorities being driven by the superintendent, often with conflicting drivers with those priorities, and you have to make decisions on resources, but there needs to be somebody who's able to work through that and communicate the reasoning, communicate to the public, to the staff, to the students, so that there's an understanding of why these decisions are being made. And I'm not going to read the rest of these through with you, just laying out that they were selected based on that they were above 50% of the respondents said there's needs to be some improvement in this area within the district. So in final summary, the primary theme that came out to me was that ethical behavior combined with that ability to resolve conflict in a fair and transparent manner is the number 1 thing that the survey respondents are telling you as a board they think the community needs in the next superintendent. And there's 2 themes that go along with that. One is that school improvement through investment in quality staff, and the other would be effective communication with staff, community, and the board. So I think that's what I've got to share with you out of what I saw out of the survey and was able to pull out of that, and be glad to answer any questions if you have them.
John, I have one question. This is Brian Koo. Given the noted gap with our Hispanic community and noting, well, obviously we lack a significant amount of diversity in SCWM, but we have a strong and vibrant Hispanic community. Would you recommend a secondary effort to really make sure we're hearing that community's voice loud and clear, or is it just something to acknowledge and move forward with?
I would acknowledge it. I would probably individually try to reach out to some members of the Hispanic community with the results of the survey and ask if they would agree with the results that we received. Okay. More than anything else, when I see this kind of a discrepancy, I try to work with districts on the next time we're going to do a survey, and you're one of the districts that we work with our educational effectiveness surveys, is what are those strategies that we can deploy that we can try to make sure that we reach those communities, whether it's through electronic surveys or paper surveys, to get that voice and be able to get those people to complete that feedback.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments for John? Questions?
No questions specifically, just thanks, John. That's definitely good information, and for us to have, and particularly, for Hank as well. So as we're looking forward to trying to hire somebody here for next year, it's important to get a good idea of where our community and parents and all stand. So this is very, very helpful information. So, and thanks.
You're welcome. I've been on both sides of this. I've hired a superintendent as a board chair, and I've been a superintendent hired twice by a board. So my goal is to provide you the best information that you can have to be able to make the decisions on how you're going to base the decision on who you're going to hire.
Thanks, John. Thanks so much.
Okay.
So thank you, board, and thank you again, John. And as I think we both mentioned, or certainly John mentioned, it's our first time partnering with CE. I'm very excited with the quality and caliber of data that we get to work with in terms of figuring out, okay, so what does this mean for SCWM? And referencing the first part of the conversation, as you recall, we took input really from three places. One was the community survey, which John just spoke to. Barbara and I engaged in focus groups with a large number of stakeholders from within and beyond the school district. And we conducted one-on-one interviews with each of our board members. And so the compilation of those three bodies of work yield, in our estimation, a document that I'd ask you to open up now, which is the ideal profile of the next superintendent. This is, as I like to frame this document, this is our, meaning Barbara and my best guess. Well, I think it's more than a guess. It's Barbara's and my analysis of what we've heard from these various inputs, and put together for you what we believe we are hearing from your community in terms of what they would like you to focus on in your search. So you're going to see, as you read through this, you're certainly going to see what you just heard from John is reflected in these bullet points, as well as perhaps some of your own thinking as board members. You are very much part of the decision. You are the decision, in fact, about who will be the next leader, and so much that came in from community, whether that's staff within the community, or students, or parents and families, or community members who maybe had kids at one point but no longer do. That is what you're seeing in these bullet points. And I say this is what we put together as our belief is what the community is saying to you, and we are mindful that the document that will be used in the search needs to be the board's document, not Hank's document, not Hank and Barbara's document, but the board's document. And so what we'll spend the majority of the rest of our time together is making sure this document reflects what you board members collectively wish us to focus on in the recruiting, and what you are committing to focusing on in the selection, so that this is a fair and open and clear process for anybody who's going to throw their hat in the ring, that these are the qualities that SCWM School Board is looking for as the most important qualities in terms of hiring their next leader. So with that, I'd like to ask you, board members, you've probably already looked through this, and maybe you're looking through it as I've been speaking. But I'd like to take some time and really ask you to engage with each other. You can certainly ask me questions, but really I'd like you to engage with each other as to whether this is right, both on is something there that shouldn't be there, is something that wasn't there, maybe needs to be inserted, or is there some language that could be improved or changed that would better reflect the desires of the board. Does that make sense? And I see Eric's turned his video on, but it might, if others want to turn that on, that might be helpful.
So I can start with some initial comments that came to mind as I was reading through the profile. When I read, I could definitely see some advantages to somebody that's certainly been in the chair before, that's had the superintendent experience, but I don't know that I would discount it. So in other words, we could have situations where we have somebody that's been in that chair, but maybe they've been a superintendent for a school district that only has a couple hundred students. We have some of those districts in the state, versus somebody that does have an immense amount of operational experience that maybe is an assistant superintendent at a larger district. So without obviously knowing the pool of candidates and recruiting, that was just one thing that kind of in my mind, I don't know that I would want to strongly say, yes, they have to have that experience, because I'm worried that might limit us to some otherwise very qualified candidates, particularly as it relates to some of the things that John had shared regarding some of that shows those strong qualities and related to ethics, professional norms, being transparent, open communications, all of those other factors. So I'm just a little concerned about limiting the pool of candidates with that one factor. Not that it's an advantage, of course it's an advantage, but just kind of some of my thoughts on that.
Eric, I want to jump in. I think you make an excellent point. It's the very first bullet point. It really deserves talking about. Of all of the bullet points there, it is probably the most singularly delimiting in that somebody can easily read this document and rule themselves out because they don't meet number one. Can I recommend, I would like to spend time on this, but because I think it's so important, I wonder if we could save this for a little later in the conversation, hit some of those other bullet points, and then come back to this very important one.
Sure.
Are there any other bullet points that make you wonder, or anything you're not seeing on this sheet that you thought or wanted to see?
I'll just say, just so Hank's like, is anybody listening to me out there? No, I guess, that would definitely jumping into that topic too, because, I think we all might have some thoughts on that as well. But other than that, I mean, I think it's a pretty good compiled list. There's a lot of definite qualities in there. I know, from my personal perspective that I would be looking for as well. So I mean, I don't see anything that stands out that I would question maybe, or I think it's a good list for sure.
Thanks, sorry. And I got to apologize about my camera. I'm in post-eye surgery recovery protocol. So I'm in a goofy position that you probably don't want to see on camera.
Sorry about that, Brian.
Yeah, no worries. I double as saying just, really focuses on transparency, integrity. I appreciated the congeniality, piece of humor and grace, and it definitely paints the picture of that ideal candidate, and very much an aspirational statement here. I had a similar thought with Eric, and I kind of battle it in my mind. I know we kind of tabled that, so I can discuss later, but really otherwise this really paints the picture of that visionary leader that our district could sure use right now. Present company excluded, of course. But yeah, this is an exciting document in terms of just putting kind of a human vibe behind the position we're looking to fill.
Thanks, Brian.
Hi, this is Director Jeffries. No, I really like the list too. I don't see anything on there that doesn't belong. I know a lot of this seems internal leadership. I know that Dr. Prine spends a lot of time with area superintendents and talking to them and collaborating with the area superintendents to get a sense of what they're doing and how they're handling certain things, especially in this time of COVID. And I don't know exactly if that fits in this list or not, but being able to reach out and collaborate with peers and experts in the area and from across the state seems to me to be very important. The interaction with WASA, the Administrators Association, and then the Peninsula Superintendents. It seems to work well to when all the superintendents in the local area have discussed things and seem to be have come to consensus. I know it's probably not total agreement, but consensus on certain key points.
That's a really good point, Larry. Thank you. Yeah.
On the other bullets, just to give some additional feedback, they're all, of course, definitely needed in the position. But if I were looking at the list saying this one really is important from my perspective, I'm thinking of both the second and the seventh bullet, talking about integrity and transparency. really stand out as something, like if I were bolding the ones that I thought would really need to stand out, those two would certainly come to mind. Also, the fifth bullet down, an includer commits to creating organizational culture where all staff feel valued and treated with equal respect. To me, that stands out. Of course, you know, it's always challenging to call out ones that really stand out, because you don't want to devalue any of the other ones that are just as important. But being an advocate for all students and addressing issues of equitable programming and inclusion for students, critically important as well. So just some additional feedback there for me.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Director Jeffries again, looking at that list, it seems to me we want the new superintendent to be strong on every one of those bullet points. Not just strong on communication, but isn't very inclusive, or, you know, so it's going to be a challenge. We need somebody who meets qualifications on every one of those points, I believe.
Okay, good input. I should say, I do, so my talking points when I talk to candidates with this document is that these bullet points are not in any order. They're not in order of importance. And as an HR guy who's written a whole lot of job descriptions, I also know that there is just a sense people make when they read such documents, that even if by disclosure is, it's not in any order, people still get a sense of those that are higher up or of more importance than others. So I wouldn't bold anything, but what I might do is, and will do, because you're not taking action on this tonight, but you do need to take action on this at a board meeting in the near future. So I might personally take another look at sequence, just to make sure that I feel like it's reflecting, even though, again, I'm not going to say, I don't want to say it's in order, because it's not in a specific order, but certainly some things I think I'm hearing the board say are the ones that they jump to before others. Yeah.
Yeah, mine was not necessarily speaking from a literally bold it, but yes, maybe the sequence is a better way. However, you know, to your expertise on how to structure the list to put it out there, but those were definitely items that were important.
Thanks, Eric.
Are important.
So, Brandina, you gonna jump in?
Nope, I just been having some tech issues here, and I think I finally got my camera corrected, so I'm not like off-centered in my head that is bigger than the screen.
Got it. So let's get to this question about serving as superintendent of schools. It's an important one to figure out whether this goes on the document or not. It's not often that I put that on a set of criteria, and so there was a reason why I put it on the recommendation. And I think it stems from really in my earliest conversations, even before we started the focus groups, hearing from those of you that I spoke to, also hearing from the interim superintendent, the importance of somebody who really comes in with a set of ability to, we might call it statesmanship or boardsmanship, that often comes with having been a soup. Because even folks at high levels of the organization, if you haven't been a superintendent, you haven't really done that piece of working with boards that you did only once you get in the chair. So I actually did ask, I think all of you in your one-on-ones, your sense of whether this, and I can't say that you all said 100% because you probably didn't, but there certainly was a sense I think I got from each board member, like, yeah, it's probably really important that we have somebody who's sitting soup. Now, having said that, Eric's also right that that's a limiter. And especially with your current salary, it's your salary that you've been offering the last few times. And so I'm segueing also to another conversation that we'll need to have in the future, which is what are you going to be offering? Because the salary that you're offering right now, is in line with kind of a first-year superintendency. That is somebody who hasn't actually been a soup before. And oftentimes a district the size of SQUIM is one where somebody who has been a senior leader, a deputy soup, or a director of something would step into their first superintendency. And I think it's a really important thought, because if you do feel that this job requires somebody who's been sitting as a superintendent, and personally, I think maybe you do. You have a very complex organization. You have organizational cultural issues, which y'all know about, which are reflected in the survey. I think you do very much, I shouldn't say you do need, I think you would be well served, very, very well served by somebody who's done this job before. But if that's what you want, I also think that you need to be prepared to pay a salary approximating 200 and maybe even at or above 200. And I know that's a steep increase from where you've been before. It's not my pocketbook, so I don't have the difficult decision you have, but I would say that I think your organization does require somebody who's very seasoned. And I think a salary commensurate would be something that the board should really think about. And salary increases are not easy decisions for boards to make. We all know that, so I'm just going to state the obvious. So why don't I be quiet and ask board members to engage with each other as to whether that is something that ought to be on your criteria list or not?
So I'll start there, Hank, and kind of backing up a little bit to your point there. And I don't know, I've been here 11 years, almost 12 years, I think. And so I don't have a long history in the community, and particularly with the district as far as knowledge of where we've been. But if we go back in history I'll just start from Kelly Shea, because that's where I know, from Kelly Shea to Gary Neal. And I think prior to that, we've kind of been a early superintendent experience district up to that point. Now, Dr. Clark came in with experience, and now obviously we have Dr. Prine that has, I think that list is Dr. Prine, but so I think though with that said, that the prior the issues that where we're at now potentially stem from the fact that we've been lacking in experience over the years building up to this point. So although I do agree that it's a limiting factor, and also as we're looking at it from a bullet point standpoint and where it may stand on there, I think for us to move forward and be successful, there probably needs to be some experience there for me, just to get us moving in the right direction. You know, Dr. Prine's getting us moving in that direction, and it would be good to hand that over to at least somebody that has some background and ability to take that piece. Now in the past, we've had individuals that when you look at that list, were maybe good at this point and that point, but I mean, honestly, the leadership part had been lacking for a while, and I think that's where we ended up in some of the concerns that we have now. So that's my kind of 2 cents worth, and I know that's probably why we've been at the pay scale that we have for a while, because we've worked with individuals at that lower range. So I'll allow others to. Who's next?
I'll go. Director Jeffries. I agree with everything you said, Brandino, and adding in a piece that Eric brought up. Well, Dr. Clark, for example, had experience in districts, but seemingly smaller districts. And like you said, ours is complex enough. We're not a huge district like Seattle area or something like that. But I think we're looking for a superintendent that's had experience with the districts of similar size or maybe a little bit larger, that's used to working with teams and building a coalition of administrators and staff and parents for the betterment of the schools. And that, so I think probably, somebody with experience at a school the size or a little bit bigger, then SQUIM would be something we'd be looking for. It might be in a large, somebody coming from a large district where the assistant superintendents actually had superintendent duties over several schools and acted as area superintendents. I know there are places where they do that. Because I think we're looking at candidates from inside Washington and outside Washington. And so we may have an assistant superintendent out there that essentially has run a small school system within a larger school system. So I think that would be important to not overlook or not to negate their ability to come to SQUIM. And I do agree with Brandino. My knowledge of the past is limited also, but from what I've observed and heard, what I'm concerned about is the idea that, what we have is good enough for SQUIM. We shouldn't need to pay a superintendent $200,000. The high school was just fine when I went there. We don't need a new one. That sort of attitude. And I can understand where that's coming from. I thought the high school that I went to was very good. And boy, why don't we just go back to the way we did things? Because we succeeded, but that's, we're comparing a different world, almost a alternative universe nowadays. So yeah, I think SQUIM deserves the best. And in order to get the best, we are going to have to pay for it. And I think we have to make sure we're recruiting in the best people to apply for the job at SQUIM that are going to fit our needs the best. I'm not sure I added or confused the discussion, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. Thank you.
I can pile on as well. I've arrived, in my mind, and I appreciate your candor, Hank, about the complexity of our district, some of our challenges, our known challenges, and frankly, budget concerns or considerations, if you will, as far as right sizing to the candidate we're seeking. We've got a lot of transformative work ahead of us as a district, and that is going to take, that's going to take an experienced hand. And I see the value. My only pause, and I'm just throwing this out there to capture it in the universe, is perhaps, our district needs to continue to right size our expenses to keep up with, other districts and professional norms. And that's a conversation we've had at the board level recently. I am concerned about every time we push that needle forward, whether or not we're doing so in perpetuity. And just being candid, as dynamic of a district as we are, if that's something we can afford on the long term. But at this point in time, I agree with the sentiments of my colleagues, as a little uncomfortable as that may feel, moving that needle forward. But like I said, I appreciate your candor in bringing that forward and for us to be able to have that discussion.
One of the things that comes to mind also, and I think it's fair to say without a doubt that having that that served as superintendent of schools is certainly a preferred quality from my perspective. Whether or not we want it to be the very top of the list, or if we want to just keep that in mind as we're filtering candidates, I think is an open question. But that's not to say that we shouldn't try to be competitive to recruit. Well, and I'll say recruit and retain the best leader, because I think the retain part is an important aspect to consider as well. If we're, I wouldn't want to, the one situation where I might be slightly hesitant on on experience is if we have somebody that's not committed to stay at a district for, you know, a long period of time, 6 to 8 to maybe even 10 years. I don't know if that's completely out of the norm, but I think that our district would definitely benefit from some stability in that position as well. And when I think of salary, both the recruit and retain obviously go hand in hand with that. So, but I also wonder about somebody who's if that, and certainly welcome your expertise on this, Hank, but is that somebody that where does that ideal candidate that is planning on staying at a location for 8 years, as an example, that's a completely arbitrary number, but you'll is there a pool of folks that we're typically looking for, somebody that's had 10 years of experience as a superintendent, 5 years of experience as a superintendent, so those are kind of some open questions I have, but definitely fair to say that some experience in the chair is preferred. But I think that I'd like to see the pool of candidates to see what other qualities might even overcompensate for that regarding some of the other priorities we have as a district.
So I guess my question, so thank you, board, for cogently offering kind of how that sits with you. And I guess what I would ask then is, I can moderate that language a little bit to allow, let me start off by saying this. Although we want somebody who's going to hit all the bullet points, there's no guarantee that anybody hits all the bullet points or that person's the right person, right? So, and I say, what I'm saying to you is what I say to candidates. Like, if you see one bullet point where you don't think you're so strong, that doesn't de facto rule you out. Again, as you look through this, the one that's sort of the clearest, like, am I or am I not, is your very first bullet point, right? And so I guess I would ask, we could leave that in, and that is in as a strong statement. It doesn't mean that you absolutely have to have been that, but it is a strong statement. It's there at the very top, and it's hard to argue with what that means. And I could also moderate that language a little bit to just be clear to who's ever reading this that, in essence, the preferred. I'm not going to say preferred. I'm going to say something that is synonymous with preferred. And I'm seeing some people nod, and Brian, I can't see you, so I can only guess. And maybe that's, maybe. So I just like, we just if you briefly each sort of feedback on, do you want to stay with the language as written, or do you want me to moderate that a little bit?
I'm comfortable with moderating it a little bit.
I would agree to, and to the point too, does it have to be the first bullet as well? If we're looking at sequencing and moving that down, because it is, I mean, I work in this realm. This is what I do for a living. And so, when we put our job postings together, and I'm working with HR and just trying to, it's like, no, let's not throw that right up there at the top. Let's get some people to at least think about the job first before we slam them with this, this piece that could, kick them out the door or get them to think, oh, well, geez, I'm just not qualified for that. So I'm going to move on. So I would definitely be okay with some moderation to the language, and maybe even that'd be the last of those 3 bullets. I don't know.
Got it. Thanks, Brendan.
Yeah, I agree. Moderation of the language, something along the lines of preferred, previous superintendent experience, preferred, or whatever word you choose. Are there other specific qualifications that go into search like that? Like they need to have a doctorate degree in education leadership, or how does that play a role?
It does sometimes. It is not something I heard in SQUIM. So in some communities, and I will say a diminishing number of communities, you will see that. John's old stomping ground, Richland, is one community I worked with. And if you're familiar with Richland, you might not be surprised to hear that was a community where doctorate was very important in the superintendent. I don't know that it came up at all. Barbara, by the way, is here with me. She's in the listening side of the panel, so she's not a panelist. But if it came up, maybe it came up once. So it was not certainly anything that was that rose to a level of priority that the person should have a doctorate.
Yeah, I'm not sure of our previous superintendents, with Dr. Clark and Dr. Prine. I don't think it was Dr. Neal. Is that correct?
I don't think.
And previous superintendents didn't necessarily have doctorates in education.
It's not typically a set expectation, although, as I say, there are some communities that feel strongly about it, but the majority do not.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, did you want to offer anything on this?
No, just thinking about that, believe it or not, I've thought a bit about the exact question Larry's brought up. I think we're a community, and I'm noticing a few of our participants, one I know is a Juris Doctorate, so respect to the audience here, but I think we're a community that certainly appreciates advanced education, lifelong learning, and things like that, but we don't demand it. And so if I had to guess the ethos of SCWM and this community of whether or not we would draw that hard line, I don't think that would be consistent.
Okay, great. So board, I think unless there's other points on any of these that folks want to offer, so I'm going to pause in a moment to see if there is. What I would like to do is go back and redraft just a couple of pieces, namely sequencing in the couple of areas where you mentioned, and do something with that first bullet point to make it a better reflection of where the board collectively is. I will then get it back to you, probably via Tracy, and ask that you take action on it at an upcoming board meeting. Usually, because we've already talked about that, usually that can be done in consent agenda. So that's where I would recommend it, unless folks want me to come back and talk about it more. I have a feeling you have enough other things on your upcoming board plates that you don't need to do that. So that would be my recommended course. And once you take action on that, that really gives me license to say this is what the SCWM board has announced as the criteria for their superintendent search. So thank you. So the other thing is that, and you might have seen in my note to you late last week, is I haven't got, and Tracy, you are still on, great. So I'm going to ask that Tracy calendar a conversation at an upcoming board meeting to talk specifically around salary. What I'll ask at that time is, even though that'll in all likelihood be at a board meeting rather than a workshop, although it could be either way, because I won't be asking the board to take action on that. I'm not looking you to come to an official determination of what the salary range is, but rather I want to engage in a conversation and really have you engage in a conversation where I can hear and sense where the board as a collective is with respect to salary. It may make sense for that conversation to be in early December when the new board is seated. I'm leaning toward thinking it is, because that new board is going to be the board that's going to ultimately approve the contract. So so plan on both of those things in the coming months, I guess, although early December is not that far away. We are looking to start the recruiting right around winter break, but you notice I don't have a timeline for you other than a general timeline, which I don't think I sent to you, but that's okay, because really I want the timeline also to be approved by the new board, because we're going to look at specific dates of interviews and so forth, and it doesn't make sense to do that until we know who's sitting in the 5 chairs. So we'll do both those pieces. Tracy, if you could calendar maybe the first board meeting in December, or whenever you think appropriate in early December, we could knock off salary and we could knock off timeline. And I just see a will do from Tracy. Thank you, Tracy. Whereas the document itself doesn't need to wait till December for action. So I promised you I would pause again, so I'm going to pause now. I know you have a few more minutes before you break for your regular meeting. Is there anything else on this document you would like me to attend to before sending it back to you?
One, not related to the document itself, but just one other question. I'm not sure if, I know we could obtain this without, but I just wasn't sure if it's something you have at your fingertips or not, is just information about salaries, comparable sized districts. I don't know if that's something you have ready. I know it's all public information. We can get it, but
I'm gonna work with your ESD, and typically your ESD superintendent. I shouldn't say typically. I would say oftentimes when I've worked with Washington districts, the superintendent, the ESD, has some sort of information around that. So I will do that, and I'll have something for you that will look regionally, and I'll also probably pull in some from other parts of the state that look similar in terms of demographics and size to SQUIM. So thanks for the question. I will take care of that.
thank you.
Nothing specific, Hank. I just was going to say, and I think Larry had addressed this early as we were starting the meeting. We actually have all of our candidates in the room today. So be thinking about this question. Glad that you all had an opportunity to attend today and kind of get an idea of where we're at with this as well. But this will be a good conversation for y'all at that point. So yeah, great work. Thanks, Hank. Appreciate it.
Great to see you all. Yes, thank you.
All right. I will see you all in the other side, I guess.
It is the same link, so you can stay here or log back.
Oh, we can stay here. Okay, great, Trace.
Yep.
All right, so we're adjourned. We're done until 6, correct?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.